honors program and our three excellent students that are going to present tonight on three different topics, all interdisciplinary to some degree in nature. Carolyn Norris, of course, is from Alabama. She's looking for a pharmacy school pretty soon now. And her topic, naturally, is going to be on the pharmaceutical industry, how that ties into healthcare, ties into business. I'm going to call you Noah. Luke Eichhorn will be presenting to us tonight about the time between atheism and communism, so bringing philosophy and economics and social stuff into the scope. And then our anchor man tonight is Todd, Hounchell, also from the great state of Texas. Todd will be presenting tonight on a financial matter having to do with the great wealth transfer. It's business, finance, psychology, different things that Todd will bring into it. So, without any further comment, we'll bring Caroline to the front. Take it away, Caroline.
Thank you for everyone for coming out tonight. The past 2 semesters, I've based a lot of my research on the pharmaceutical field, like Dr. Crispell mentioned, because I'm going to pharmacy school this fall. Last semester, I discussed the various roles that pharmacists have in the healthcare field, especially now they're becoming more professionals in this field rather than just prescribing medications. One question I had throughout the research in the past, though, is how does the economy and government policies impact the pharmaceutical industry, especially with the recent debates and elections on topics such as big pharma and inflation. I decided to focus my research on this area this semester and study the impact on general population health from the economy, because these correlations seem to have a significant impact on America as well. Like I said previously, the economy has been a highly discussed issue in the U.S., especially with recent political disagreements. A nation's financial health is crucial to its success, since the economy drastically impacts all lives of Americans. These financial effects reach so much further than just the stock market or inflation. The economy ultimately impacts the state of public health and healthcare prices. In the broad sense, economy impacts healthcare system by impacting the health of the community. You may wonder how these two may affect each other, since they are clearly very distinct within the fields. But with health and economic changes that may appear to be separate, important correlations have been noted between the two systems. First of all, the economy benefits when individuals are healthy. Healthy individuals are better able to enter the workforce, therefore advancing the economy. Additionally, a community's well-being improves as the economy grows and advances. According to an article published by Dartmouth College in 2017, economic opportunity motivates and enables people to invest in their health. This implies that members of the community are more inclined to spend a larger sum of money on medical care and insurance if they're financially stable. Similarly, wealthier individuals tend to receive better medical treatment as a result of their ability to afford more expensive health care. U.S. life expectancy has continued to decrease since 2014, and this has been attributed to worsening health among the working-age individuals in lower socioeconomic classes. The percentage of low-income people in this category has continued to increase, leading to a correlation between income and well-being. Also, a government's economic policies can result in benefits for individuals' health. For example, taxes on cigarettes and banning of public smoking led to a decline in deaths and diseases that developed from smoke contact. The government can also implement policies that improve an individual's socioeconomic status in order to benefit community health. Some example policies of this may include providing for low-income children with food vouchers or housing, or implementing programs that help financially struggling adults. Overall, the economy directly impacts the general health of a population. We can see the obvious impacts of these economic factors in the American healthcare system specifically. A significant economic factor to consider is inflation. Medical inflation generally increases at a greater percentage than consumer inflation. According to this article published by the website Health Systems Tracker in 2024, and the chart shown behind me, since 2000, the price of medical care and services provided, as well as insurance, drugs, and medical equipment, has increased by 121.3%, which is the top line in green. In contrast, all prices for consumer goods and services rose by only 86.1% in the same period. This shows that medical care has a greater inflation rate than just general consumer products. Because medical costs are hit harder by inflation, healthcare becomes more and more unaffordable for individuals. This leads to community health decreasing, since the majority of people can no longer afford the medical care they need to stay well. The drastic costs of healthcare also impact other parts of the American economy. When citizens are spending more money on healthcare, they're spending less money in other areas such as vacations and gifts or non-essential items that they may have spent with the extra money if they hadn't acquired this financial debt from their medical bills. On the other hand, the effects of public health are demonstrated in the American economy during the COVID-19 pandemic. When the pandemic shut down the majority of workplaces in the U.S., the economy and stock market suffered as a result. This correlation between the economy and healthcare has been clearly displayed in the U.S. in recent years. Now that the correlation between the economy and general public health have been established, I want to shift my research towards specifically the pharmaceutical field. The main question I wanted to address was how the economy specifically impacts the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. A term used a lot in recent years is big pharma, but you may wonder what exactly this term means. These are large pharmaceutical companies that manufacture various medications in bulk, allowing for more efficiency than private entities compounding the drugs independently on their own. These companies' presence have grown, especially in recent years. Dr. Stevens Farstein defines the intentions of big pharma as a business governed by the motive of selling products and making money. These companies are specifically overseen through the government by the FDA. Many view the pharmaceutical field as out of touch, especially in recent years, because of their monopolistic practices and the lack of competition in the industry. To some people, big pharma appears to use their profits for themselves rather than seeing their harmful impact on the community. On the other hand, though, in the positive sense, these companies made the production of medications more cost-efficient and time-effective. As discussed in my research from this past semester, large companies producing medication in bulk allow pharmacists to use their expertise in more specialized healthcare and positively impact direct patient treatment. While big pharma did have these negative reputations in regards to medication prices and insurance, these companies do provide benefits to the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. Another area in this is drug shortages and high medications that are currently affecting the U.S. High medication prices. As stated previously, big pharma can directly impact these issues because these companies set prices and monopolize the market. Some drugs are entirely unavailable or short stocked as a result of these companies being unable to meet the demands of medicines with the supply that they're currently able to manufacture. On the issues of cost and drug prices, pharmaceutical manufacturers are continuing to raise their price of medications despite the average American being unable to afford these without a reliable insurance policy. One article stated at the beginning of 2024 that drug manufacturers raised prices on 775 brand name products by a median of 4.5%, which outpaced the rate of inflation. This indicates that these companies are partially contributing to current medication struggles by maintaining price increases even higher than the average inflation. Because of the lack of competition in specific drug categories, sometimes only these brand name products are available for purchase. The limited amount of products available give these companies monopolistic control over the given market, such as for a specific drug, and therefore the ability to increase prices in that area. Another reason drug prices are currently high in the U.S. is due to American government policies that exist today. According to this chart presented by Statistica, America spends a significant amount more on pharmaceuticals per capita than other countries. This is the average amount of money spent on drugs or medications per person in a country. So as you see from this chart on the left, over the past 10 years, the per capita for the United States has drastically increased. And the projected, I actually looked up what the actual is now, and it lines up pretty much accurately with this projected value as well. And then on the right, you see how the United States compares to the majority of other countries in the world, and it's a significant amount higher as well. The difference between America and other countries isn't due to increased medicine usage in the U.S., and that would be why they're spending more money. It's actually due to America's high drug prices. While the government sets and regulates these medication prices in other countries, the U.S. allows medicine prices to be determined by market competition, leading to higher spending in the U.S. As a whole, health insurance tries to keep these costs low for individuals, but this becomes more difficult due to shortages and increasing costs. Much more can be discussed about these issues regarding insurance policies as well as Medicare and private insurance in further research later on. Solutions to these problems I've listed are currently being presented in government, but the question of how exactly to provide assistance for the American people is still remaining unanswered. The lack of available medicine in certain areas and escalating prices are clearly solutions to this in the future. Because of the rise of economic concerns in the field, pharmacists are currently exploring their influence on alleviating these negative impacts in healthcare. A division of the pharmaceutical field that has emerged is called pharmacoeconomics. Pharmacists who specialize in this area can better study the impacts of the economy and more closely identify solutions to problems within the pharmaceutical field. According to Dalton and Byrne, this area of study allows pharmacists to identify, measure, and compare the cost of different pharmacotherapies or services and what significance they will have on healthcare budgets and patient health. Through this analysis, pharmacists can streamline their use of medicine and better able it to align with their budgets and resources that are currently available to them. Another economic impact results from one of the responsibilities pharmacists have in their field, which is monitoring patients to avoid adverse medicine reactions. Many hospitalizations occur due to these preventable drug interactions, especially in elderly patients who are taking multiple medications as it is. These medication errors are very costly for healthcare systems, so healthcare costs could potentially decrease as a result of lowering the amount of adverse interactions that occur. One question that this point leads to then is whether pharmacists can decrease the overprescription of certain drugs as a whole. If a doctor is constantly recommending their patients take medications when there's better alternatives, this may cause unnecessary pharmaceutical spending. To help with this, a pharmacist can switch a patient to alternative cheaper medications or discontinued unneeded medicines as a whole to help lower costs. By avoiding overprescribing certain medications or giving patients medications that are unnecessary, drug shortages would not occur as often and prices could potentially decrease in the future. Pharmacists are still exploring the way they can positively impact the economic portion of the pharmaceutical field. In conclusion, I hope this presentation allows you to see how the economy influences aspects of public health, healthcare expenses, and drug costs and shortages. Understanding the relevance of financial stability and the economy on healthcare allows lawmakers and medical professionals to better assess how to improve these issues. Not only is it important for those in these leadership positions, though, to understand this, but these economic policies impact the daily lives of all Americans. So this topic is applicable to everyone in every field of life. We can also apply this topic to ourselves in a biblical perspective. Despite the overwhelming fears and burdens of the world, Christians have faith in an eternal life in heaven rather than trusting in the fleeting worries of the world. While topics such as healthcare are highly stressful, especially in our current politics and culture, Christians should know that God will take care of them. The anxieties of the world are all under His control, and ultimately things here won't matter when we're in heaven with Him one day. Our physical health should not be our main focus or consideration in life over spiritual health, because ultimately these will not matter and we'll all die in the end. Christians should have confidence in God rather than on the flawed aspects of healthcare, economy, or government. I hope that this presentation was helpful for you to understand the correlation between the economy and healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. How do they justify costs, the pharmaceutical companies? What's one of the justifications?
Really themselves, from what I've read, it's a big topic right now of whether these pharmaceutical industries do more help than hurt, because some are more looking out for themselves and selfish in this area. But then others, it's just they're looking to lower costs by making it cheaper through manufacturing it rather than it being done independently. So I think some people are justifying it by thinking, oh, I'm making more money out of this. But then in other ways, they justify it by saying, well, we're making it cheaper by not being done independently.
Of course, there's research and development costs and advertising costs. No one sees any pharmaceutical ads on television, do they? You can't turn around hardly without seeing one. Skylar, do you have a question?
It's still curious to me how big of a thing healthcare is and how it's developed relatively recently in terms of the history of the world and such. So I still wonder if there's not more ways we should focus on healthier lifestyle, better quality of food, rather than focusing so much attention on the medications themselves to improve health.
Yeah, I think that's definitely interesting. I think, especially in recent years, people are doing more of a push towards that. People living more healthier lifestyles, trying to eat clean and whole foods, exercising more. I think that's been a big push recently. And I know I was talking to Dr. Crispell about this, about RFK coming in and wanting to take out some of the things from our food that makes it last longer but is also unhealthier. So there's definitely a push now to take things away from it being all about what's cheapest or medications that you can use to just fix things, but fix the problems themselves. So I definitely think that's a good point.
Meredith?
My question, talking about kind of the like monopoly that Big Pharma has. I remember in your first honors talk, you talking about how medicines were made. I don't remember all the details of that, but is a lot of the reason that other companies really don't have a chance is just because like all the capacity you need to make these medicines, or like is it really just that Big Pharma only has the resources, or why is there such a lack of competition?
That's something I had kind of gotten to research, but didn't fully research. But I read a couple places that it was possibly that they held kind of the rights over it, like they discovered it, so they hold the rights to that specific, I guess, configuration of molecules or whatever to make the drugs. So they hold that, so they can kind of regulate the price however they want because they have the right to it.
In any business, why do some companies become larger than others? It's a different industry. I mean, it's tied into science and research, especially in the area that you just talked about. But why does any company become larger?
They have the capacity for it.
They have the capacity, they can go to scale in a bigger way. They also have a better formula, perhaps. But anything from Chick-fil-A to Amazon, you see things that grow bigger than others in an industry. Reputation, right? Efficiency, kind of takes you to that. So, okay. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, you mentioned the adverse medical interactions, and I've read before that there's like lower people reporting those than what really happens. Did you read anything about how that's done, or how you as a pharmacist can help that kind of thing?
I have not looked into people not reporting it. I have seen, like from the pharmacist perspective, a lot of my research last semester was about the different roles of pharmacists. And since they're kind of becoming more prominent now and being able to specifically give medicines to patients and stuff, they're able to closely monitor them and see what's going on with their health, see what other medicines they're taking, and see how it's impacting them overall rather than just going to community pharmacy and giving them stuff. They can better monitor that and keep track of like dosage and things like that to help keep them healthy. So I know that they can help in that way, but I didn't look into like how much was actually being reported of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Alice?
Well, I was just wondering, do you foresee a time in the future when the American government might intervene in a way that's kind of similar to the other countries to lower the costs for drugs?
I have wondered if that's the direction we may head at some point. I think a big reason that America does it differently is just because of the way our economy is set up. I'm not a business person, so I couldn't exactly attest to that. But I know in other countries they have more control over market competition and things such as that. So that when I was looking this up, it said that other governments are able to better control prices because they're more in charge of it, while we just leave it up to just kind of the companies themselves to set prices. So I do wonder if that may be something pushed for in the future, but that would probably have to go through a lot of like laws passed to get to that point.
I mentioned advertising earlier. Can anybody think of a healthcare ad right now where the song's going through your mind? Yeah, where people bounce up and down and saying things like that. What's the tendency in the free market economy? If you have a problem, what do I have for you? I have a pill. Now that cuts the middleman out where I've got to take care of myself or eat better or be a crunchy mom or whatever it is. I can just take a pill or I can take a shot and I can become less heavy. I can have less of a problem with psoriasis. I can have less of a problem with anything. And so that's, once you start advertising that, you drive the market. And once doctors prescribe it, then it becomes something that's trusted. And that drives some of the costs. It also helps our pharmaceutical business be on the cutting edge of things. So, yeah, all that, you'd have to change the rules about what could be advertised and how it's going to be produced. We're more of a free market system. So, Caleb?
My question was kind of similar, but with all this talk about the conflict between money and financial motives, and then the need for health and safety, when looking at our system and how it differs from other countries, I guess my question is, what would an optimal system look like? Is there a system that could actually kind of manage these conflicts in a beneficial way? Like, how does our is there a better system, or are we kind of stuck with this problem?
That's something that's definitely being debated a lot right now, I feel like. I didn't necessarily look into the specifics of how other countries run things, but I do think it's important to kind of compare, since America clearly had a much higher level of spending than other countries. So I think it's important to compare a little bit, but also maybe harder, because the way our government's run is different than some of the other countries that were on that chart. I know several of them, I think, were communists, and from what the research I'd said. So it would be different to have to see how our country could do that in a way that wouldn't go back on things like the Constitution. I think it's a big thing we have to look at right now in government to see if, like, what policies could be made. That's something I didn't do a lot of research about because it's just a very complicated topic, and especially with insurance companies, that's something else I didn't touch on a whole lot, but there's a whole debate about that as well. So.
Because insurance companies are going to be making something out of this as well. So that's, yeah, and it has more to do with our economic model than it does with our government. The fact that we've got a free society allows us to debate these things. So if anybody can really fix it or reform it, it would be a place like here, as opposed to a more closed society. But yeah, that's a good question. No?
Yeah, I was, obviously, in terms of the economy, a big thing right now is tariffs. I was wondering if we rely on any international manufacturing for our drugs, and if so, will the proposed tariffs, as ones that have already been enacted, exacerbate this problem that you talked about?
I did not look into the international companies that do this. A lot of the ones I was looking at, I believe, were U.S.-based companies, and that's why this was a U.S. problem, because they set the prices here. So I'm not exactly sure about internationally.
That's a good question. And the biggest weight loss drug, Dr. Densford, Mr. Densford, elevated. Nova, what's the name of that? You remember that? Novo or Nova, out of Scandinavia. They make the weight loss drugs. I'm not sure there's a tariff on them. So I'm not sure if we get, things to put into our price, we just get the product. But there is some of that. Bayer aspirin for years, that's not American, that's German. And so we get them from different parts of the world, primarily Western Europe. So, we're,
I think you might have touched this on this a little bit already, but do you think that by encouraging more competition from smaller pharmaceutical companies that could reduce shortages?
I do think it would help if there were more companies being able to drive the competition, from what I've read. But there are still smaller companies that exist that make the medicines themselves and have their own kind of customers and consumers of that. But those, I've seen several articles where those are starting to go out of business more. So I do wonder what it would be like in the future without some of those, because some of those still exist to be able to be competition. But if they get run out of business, what would happen without those and just the large companies that existed?
okay.
You kind of mentioned at some point the idea of turning to other solutions before medicine. And along those lines, I guess, with a shift in the cultural mindset regarding medication and turning to other solutions before medication, would things like putting limitations on how they advertise things and how they promote their products, would that be one way to effectively shift this problem?
Can you repeat your question? I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, sorry, I rambled a lot there. I guess, would putting limitations specifically on advertising, would that be beneficial to decreasing this problem?
I do wonder if that would help. I think a big thing, like I've been talking about earlier, was pharmacists can regulate how much is actually being given out of medicine instead of doctors just like giving it, there's like a small issue, just giving them the medicine and over-prescribing it. I do wonder if that would also help in a different sense, because that's an area that helps. But advertising has been, I know Dr. Crispell mentioned it, just very in your face on commercials and stuff. So I do wonder if that would help consumers not purchase those products as much and help with pricing.
You can't watch an hour of the news if you choose to do something like that without having about 15 drug commercials pushed at you. Especially if you watch the news at certain times of the night when they know people about my age are watching, because they know that they can look for prescription drugs, and so they advertise that. You mentioned cigarettes. When's the last time you saw a cigarette ad on TV? You don't see them. And it used to be you could not advertise hard liquor on television. Now you can. That drives sales. If you stop advertising alcohol on television, that would affect its market. You stop advertising prescription drugs on TV, you affect its market. So there's going to be a political pushback there and an economic question, but you definitely affected it. Absolutely. Now if you come out from the other direction and don't encourage it as much, then, so it's on you. I expect you to fix it as a pharmacist. All right, Luke?
So you're talking earlier about the monopolistic nature of certain parts of pharmaceutical business. So after a company develops a new drug, they have a certain period where they can, basically they're the only ones that have the right to sell it. And how has that specifically affected the economy and the pharmaceutical market? Like, is that really what's driving some of that inflation?
I think so, especially the medical inflation. If they have the right to do whatever they want with the pricing, I mean, that's the only way people get it. So they have to buy it, like that specific one, if they need it. And so that's what also adds to shortages, because everybody's like trying to get that if they need it, but only one company's making it. So I think that's a big part of it, for sure.
Joe?
And like, mine was kind of along with that as well, because as you had shown, there's a large inflation. Of course, there's gonna be inflation with just any economy really, especially with our Fed. And so normal goods and services have increased a lot, but then as you've shown, the prices of drugs have gone up even more. And so I was kind of curious, as my question was, do you think that's more manipulated more by the government, or do you think it's more by us as consumers? Like, do we have a higher demand, or is it because of that price rise because of inflation by the government?
I think it's more of consumers, I would say, because the government, from what I've seen, is pretty much hands off, except for FDA, where they regulate which drugs go out into the market. So they don't really impact pricing necessarily. I think the inflation part of it did especially have a lot to do with COVID in recent years. That was a big deal that I slightly touched on, but helped, like, it drastically impacted it as well. And so I think it has a lot more to do with consumers and even doctors overprescribing medications, like I mentioned before. It's becoming more prevalent, and that's why there's been kind of a pushback, like Skylar mentioned, about not using medicines as much because it's so prevalent right now.
Something else, Todd? Anything else? Kate? Anything? Sir? Joe? Anything else? Nothing, Allison? Okay, right?
Well, my only question is, could you see yourself working within the big pharma world, but still being able to help your patients the way that you seem to really want to?
I'm not exactly sure. I really want to work in a hospital setting, so I want to care for patients in that sense. I do think that people who are in that industry still can feel like they're helping in a sense if they're coming up with new medications to help patients or manufacture it to help patients, but there is so much uncertainty with how they're running it right now that it would be hard to be able to think you're helping as much as you want to. That would probably be something I have to look into more, like if I got to that point and see what I can do in that area, but I personally really want to work in a hospital to help people out that way.
It's a fine line, isn't it? You create a product, you need to sell that product. Is that product the best for the public? Well, partly there's government agencies to oversee that. Partly it's driven by consumers. But that is a fine balance there. And so you're working within an industry that's producing a product, or are you really helping anybody? That's a personal decision. But the cost is driven by a multitude of factors like we talked about. Anybody that's ever had arthritis that has medication knows how grateful they are for it. Or migraines knows how grateful they are for it. So we are indebted to our pharmaceutical industry to a degree. So that's the other side. Meredith?
Just a comment really, but we were talking in bio the other day about that person who made the polio vaccine. He just didn't benefit from it at all. He gave out the information for free, and then obviously polio was eradicated, well, basically eradicated quickly and efficiently, and so many people benefited from that. So it's just interesting thinking about that with all this of like, that person
people were more like that today, and maybe not withholding stuff as much, but I think that's partly like the rights to it. It'd be great if companies that are doing that maybe for themselves could, let everybody make it, and that would be better. But I do want to say, it's not every company that's doing that, but it is some, so it would be good if they did it.
Like anything, all it takes is one bad story, and that taints the whole industry. Got it? From the audience, happy with your drug companies? Have any questions? Yes, sir.
When you were talking about doctors specifically pushing lots of drugs and overprescribing, do you think that comes from those who are actually coming to get drugs? Do you think it's just because they've seen what's on TV and that's what they're there for? They walk into the doctor's offices and they're like, "Can you give me this drug?" And they're not asking for anything else. Or do you think that comes from kind of a mindset that's been built into the healthcare industry where they're like, "We need to sell these things," and that's where that idea of overprescribing and pushing these medications?
I think it's come more from the perspective of they see the commercials and they're like self-diagnosing and be like, oh, that's what I need. Or in the sense, I talked my very first semester about antibiotic overusage and how there can become resistance to antibiotics because people are using it too much. Like some people will just be like, oh, I think I need an antibiotic for this. And then they use it too much and then they're resistant to it. And so I think it's just people will self-diagnose in a sense. Or doctors maybe, like there's niche concerns with like certain diseases and they haven't totally looked into it all the way. And so maybe they just diagnosed it as something when it was really something else, so then that medicine is being used when it's not necessarily necessary. So it may not necessarily be the doctor's fault or anything, it just may need to be something that's better looked into in the future.
Biggest thing with kids is what? It has been for about 25 years now, what they get diagnosed with. You've ever heard of the letters ADHD? I'm not making fun of that, I'm not making light of that, but how many times do you hear about people being misdiagnosed or getting medications they really shouldn't be taking? So that's a classic example. I think my kid has an attention deficit disorder, therefore I will get the diagnosis I want so that I can get the medication. And maybe John will pay attention now. That's where some people go. In other cases, it's completely legitimate. So it's going to be a case-by-case thing, but what you bring up is exactly right. People are going to self-diagnose, and doctors can say, I've got a sample, why don't you try this? And the sample came from the drug company, and the drug company's helping them get that product sold. There's no nefarious conspiracy necessarily, but people can abuse the system. What else? Yes, sir.
When looking at cost of research and development and manufacturing these drugs and equipment versus what the actual retail value is, how big of a gap is that on average?
I did not look into that. That would probably be a good track to find out for sure.
Anything else?
Yes.
When you gave a comparison between our country and other countries, how do we compare with, like what Dr. Crispell was saying about the cutting edge research and stuff? Do other countries do that as much as we do? Because I was always under the impression that a lot of the reason for our high prices is that there's more research being done, and so when a new drug comes out, it's higher prices of paying for what it needed to be made.
That's definitely interesting. I didn't look into how other countries are doing that. I do know with the United States, I did a lot of my first semester research on how they researched and developed certain drugs. And a lot of times they research and develop to make up for a need or to fill in a gap that's being like left behind by medications that already exist. So high price could be due to the fact of that research. It also could be due to just the overprescription, like I've said before, or even just with certain drugs, the materials needed as well. There's lots of different factors. I would have to look at how that compares to other countries.
There's the research, there's the government requirements you have to meet, there's all kinds of tests you need to run. And so it's not just, I've developed this, now I'm going to sell it. It's all that has its cost. But you're right, I mean, that's one of the justifications. How's telehealth driven this? Like people can just get a physician online or call them up and get a prescription. Did you read anything about that?
I did not read anything about that. I think it's probably in the same sense though, of like maybe self-prescribing medicines like ADHD or like antibiotics like I was talking about. They just become overused when it's not necessarily necessary.
And
needed.
the other big thing for people your age is anxiety and depression. And that's not just this age group, but particularly this age group recently. And all you gotta do is get somebody online or call them up and get the right prescription. And now they'll even just ship stuff right to your home. So you see that? Kind of advertising. Anything else? All right, so we're gonna need to all go home, take a look at our pill bottles and make sure we're doing the right thing. Now, thank you very much, Caroline. All right, the cost and the finances things is a real thing. It's kind of one of the little themes for tonight. Pharmaceuticals is one of those things, healthcare in general. So are a number of other things. Everything costs something. And the selfishness involved in that is sometimes way too obvious to see, which is why, one reason why Karl Marx writes out the Communist Manifesto, right? Why don't we just all share and share alike? Why don't we not have a competitive free market system? Why can't we just have a state within which the workers really rule? And out of that comes, in some part, atheism. And so Luke Eichhorn's going to look at the tie tonight between communism and atheism. Come on up.
Thanks everyone for coming out tonight. Throughout history, there are very few ideologies that have had as profound an impact as communism. It has sparked revolution and shaped nations, being a common topic of discussion in many political and economic circles even today. When I first set out to research this subject, it had initially been about the economics of communism. However, as my research developed, I became increasingly more interested in its religious implications. This is because at its core, the communist system of theories is atheistic and fundamentally opposed to any notion of religion. Because of this, it actively seeks to eradicate it, as we will go on to see in the Soviet Union. We're going to see the reasons why this is, why communism is so against religion, and really it starts with the origin of theory. And once you take the origin of theory with Marx, you go to the application. And once you are done with the application, you get to the results, which is what Lenin was hoping to accomplish with his Soviet Union. Okay, to effectively analyze communist theory, we must first begin at the beginning with Karl Marx. Karl Marx was he was born in Germany to his father, Heinrich Marx, a Jewish rabbi who was a recent convert of Christianity. Marx himself was initially religious, even expressing his belief in Christ in his high school graduation essay. Marx went on to study law and philosophy as a university student, eventually joining a group of philosophers known as the Young Hegelians. The Young Hegelians were one of the core founders of Marxist theory, and it influenced him in a lot of ways because of their determinist ideals. Very important to them was the supposed promise that history made of a utopian society that they saw in their contemporary society was not that fulfillment. They followed the teachings of George Hegel and were especially disposed to the idea that everything which restricted freedom and reason should be eradicated, which can typically only be done through a radical overturn of authority. The background of Marx is important to understand because it provides the basis for his thinking, ultimately culminating in his communist theory and atheism. His primary beliefs from atheism stemmed from the belief that man is the superior being in ultimate existence, and any kind of higher power is merely an illusion. Marx was a great proponent of philosophical activism, which refers to the notion that philosophy without action is nothing. In the words of Marx, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. The Young Hegelian standpoint can be seen throughout this statement as it focuses on the rebellion needed to change. The Because of Marx's strong and radical beliefs, he inevitably would go on to change the world in many ways. The Communist Party approached Marx in 1848 to write their Communist Manifesto. In this manifesto, Marx frequently makes Jewish and Christian allusions to portray his message and goals. He refers to the communist message as a gospel, meaning good news, which is a word typically associated with Christianity. The point of his rhetoric is to emphasize the social reformation that communism will bring, as Christianity had done many years prior. Though Marx utilized religious vernacular, he was a stark opponent of any religion and cited it as the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. In Marx's theory, man contrived religion to deal with and live through the hardships of life. Marx held the belief and hope that with the institution of communism would come a mass apostasy from religion as a whole, freeing them from the bondage of illusion. At its heart, communism is primarily a social religious reform rather than its true economic proposed form. Marx and later communist leaders sought after the ultimate abolition of religion. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a Christian author who lived through the Soviet Union, claimed these statements in a speech against communism. Within the philosophical system of Marx and Lenin, at the heart of their psychology, hatred of God is the principal driving force, more fundamental than all their political and economic pretensions. Militant atheism is not merely incidental or marginal to communist policy. It is not a side effect, but the central pivot. The ideas of Marxist policy suggest that with the deconstruction of capitalism and the further institution of communism, the people would no longer need this drug that they require to get through life. In Marx's opinion, the supposed perfect and economic social system of communism would quell all desire for a higher existence or a better state of being. This falls within the fundamental thesis of Marx's philosophy, that man is the highest and most superior being. Man could supposedly create a system so perfect that religion will be no longer required as a crutch, and man can finally be the true God of the world. To create theory about something is one matter. It is another to actively apply it. Lenin established the Soviet Union in 1922, following Marx's radical call to action he proposed in the Communist Manifesto. The essence of communism denies all claims of a higher power or religion, which inherently rejects any concept of higher power. This sentiment is ironic, however, as the totalitarian government to come would be one of the most oppressive and authoritative to ever exist. Lenin, in his writings, would juxtapose religion and communism, the former being proposed as a doctrine of prison and shackles, while the latter was a maxim of freedom. In the words of Lenin, religion is one of the forms of spiritual oppression which everywhere weighs down heavily upon the masses of the people. Lenin expanded on Marx's original ideas, claiming that they were a tool used by the bourgeois to oppress the working class. In the time before the communist takeover, the primary ruling authority in Russia was the Russian Orthodox Church, headed by the Tsars. This gave Christianity central political power in the region. You can see why Lenin would have a problem with this. This is what caused much of the emphasis on the abolition and diminishment of religion in the Soviet Union. Ousting the church pushed out not only religious power, but also political power. With the dismantlement of the church would come the deregulation and destruction of its predominant political system. Lenin required this in order to assume absolute control over the recently conquered Russia. Throughout the rest of Lenin's political career and life, he would focus on pushing any kind of religion and beliefs out of public life. Soviet law was the foremost factor in eradicating religion from Russia. The Article 52 of the USSR Constitution prohibited the conduct of religious propaganda and made it illegal to refute any sort of atheist propaganda. The 1929 law on religious associations required that religion organizations that were even allowed to exist had to register with the government and adhere to all of its rules and regulations. This law was especially nefarious as the government utilized this kind of policy to gradually shut down and reduce the number of religious organizations, thereby pushing religion out of the life of people without much wide public notice. Religious groups were officially referred to as cults, which further promoted a negative perception of them. The organizations that were permitted to exist could not proselytize or provide religious instruction to children, engage in charitable, social, or political activities, or organize prayer or study groups. Essentially, any religious organizations were not allowed to express or spread the religion in any way. The education system was also greatly impacted in favor of atheism. Textbooks began to replace religious books in the classroom, which spoke about the incompatibility of religion and science, with Marxist writing being especially emphasized. Soviet local governments would barbarically carry out these laws effectively and efficiently, leading to the initial attack and the initial executions of 28 bishops, 1,200 priests, and over 20,000 parishioners who had been killed or executed. Though there was no discrimination in the types of religion persecuted, Christianity was the most common one, being the predominant religion of Russia. The Russian Orthodox Church had ruled for nearly 9 centuries and was the chief ingrained religion in Russia, being part of the fundamental life and values for most Russians. Communism invaded and turned the region's core principles on its head. The atheism of communism would not concede religion the right to exist, and thus the two faiths became opposed to each other. Solzhenitsyn would even suggest that Eastern Slavic Orthodoxy has been subjected to persecution even fiercer and more extensive than that of early Christian times. One situation arose in 1922 where all churches were decreed to surrender all of their valuables and relics to the Soviet government under the pretense that they would give the funds to the poor. Its true intention was to further deregulate the church and distill its political power. There was much opposement to this, mostly because of the material piety that the Russian Orthodox Church practiced. They emphasized material things and how they connect to the spiritual. This was especially because God himself came as matter in the form of Christ. By taking these relics from the Russian Orthodox Church, they were really taking away some of their spiritual life, not just their physical relics. Because of this, because of the opposition, it was so great that 45 Christians were tried and executed due to the protest against this theft. Enforcement was relatively lenient even in this time. Another way that the Soviet Union attempted to destroy the church was through the organization of the League of the Militant Atheists. Their central function was to organize anti-religious processes and create apostates from the church. Strategies to accomplish this goal included holding festivals and parties on religious holidays, as well as being in close proximity to church buildings. Many saw through this childish attempt, however, and the strategies that the government employed really lacked opaqueness in order to take away religious processes from the minds of people. Ultimately, the League of Militant Atheists mostly failed at its purposes by causing very few Christians to desert the church. Though the League of Militant Atheism failed, it incited the government to enact a more direct approach to prompt Christian apostasy. There came a mass closing of churches, as well as the institution of the 6-day work week, and Sunday was often a day was often not the day that they didn't have to work. There arose an intentional social discrimination of Christians outside the law, and for years no opportunity was given to any of them for advancement in administration or other careers. Christians were persecuted in even worse ways, with millions of Christians being sent into the Gulag throughout the life of the Soviet Union. These camps were exclusively designed to either kill or apostatize any religious person from their faith. Many Christians here were tested in their faith. Author Jonathan Luxmore wrote on certain Christians from these camps. Polish deportees returning from the anti-space and anti-time of the labor camps admitted to losing their faith. While some had also found it, preserving a sense of self-worth, Christ's question on the cross, "My God, why have you deserted me?" had been repeated many times. It's interesting to note that though many Christians fell away during this persecution, many others were brought to the Lord because of it. The religious suppression brought more souls to the Lord while also filtering out the unfaithful and traitorous. From the Soviet Union, there can be seen the clear methodology of the successful types of apostatizing strategy, which is the gradual method. This entails a slow and strategic shutdown of religion and its activities. The government still required the people and their loyalty despite their openness of their hatred of religion. After centuries of religious allegiance, the Russian people were not willing or eager to abandon their core principles and values that they had had for so long. The gradual method was intended to slowly shut out and deregulate any kind of any existence of religion, which allowed the government to steal away religion from the minds of people. Well, stated above the 1929 law and religious associations, these religious associations slowly being decreased as they were more gradually not allowed to exist after being allowed to exist for a certain amount of time. Though some religious symbols were allowed to be portrayed, they were often required to be portrayed alongside communist symbols, such as portraits of Lenin and Stalin. This placed religion and communist leaders on the same level to de-emphasize the importance of religion in people's minds. This was especially done in classrooms to further indoctrinate the children into atheism and communist theories. In the case of the gradual method, repugnant blasphemy is replaced with skillful skepticism. Religion was never entirely outlawed in the Soviet Union. The main intent was to decrease the influence of the church and of religion, and in that way to push out the political power that the Russian church held at the time. The spread of religion and power of religion was quelled, which would slowly degrade people's faith and destroy their principles. Having examined the religious ramifications of communism, we now attempt to establish an analysis of its ideals from a Christian worldview. Paul writes to Timothy that the Spirit explicitly says that in later times some will fall away from the faith, paying attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons. From the first letter of John, just as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have appeared. Marx's atheism, attempting to and succeeding to create a Christian apostates, can only be described as Marx himself being an opponent of God or an Antichrist. The atheistic system that Marx proposed is intended to draw as many disciples away from the faith as possible. For this is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son. 1 John 2:22. Marx's self-deification philosophy is also described by Paul in 2 Thessalonians. But no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. A great apostasy has and will continue to take place, is being incited by these antichrists, influenced by Satan, who deny the Lord. We must not follow blasphemous antichrists or hold beliefs that run contrary to what God has revealed to us in his word. We must understand that we are extremely fortunate to live in a nation with very little Christian persecution. Though this is the case, no amount of persecution must be allowed to repress our worship of the Lord. The trials of persecution show the proof of our faith being much more precious than gold which is perishable, even though tested by fire. It is through this that we may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. 1 Peter 1:7. Those who are not willing to share in the suffering of Christ are not worthy to bear his name. We must remain steadfast in our faith in Christ, and our doctrines shall remain firm through the fiercest storm. The story painted by the evolution of communism from its originator to its application and results can be seen as a warning to how atheism can be utilized to create fear. True communist theory promotes atheism, selfishness, and religious apostasy, and thus cannot be respected as a system of governance. Communism denies humans their epistemic rights and degrades people to the point of religious apostasy and spiritual death. Thank you.
Well, when you put it that way, I don't know why anybody's ever been a communist. So what is the appeal other than share and share alike?
Well, really, a lot of the people in Russia did not want the communist system. It was these people who adhered to the Marxist philosophy that wanted to create a supposed perfect system for this working class. And really, in that society that Marx and Engels lived in, it was very oppressive towards the workers. Capitalism is much worse in that day. And so it can be pretty obvious as to why some people, they saw that going on around them, and they wanted an overturn and an equality that they didn't have at that time, because they were being oppressed by the working class. That Marx was right about that. But the way that he went about it was incorrect and fundamentally flawed.
No, it's an annihilation of the soul when it comes down to it. Russian peasants are serfs. They're effectively slaves. Workers in the Western world that Marx would have seen, there's no minimum wage law, there's no child labor laws, there's no safety regulations. And so people in their desperation look for extreme measures. So that's what he writes about. Carolyn, a question, comment?
I was wondering, were the people who followed this viewpoint in Russia, were they following the person of Marx or the ideology itself of like that he created, his ideology?
I didn't do too much research on that, but definitely some people really saw Marx as like divine. Obviously they were atheists, but as high as divine can be. But definitely some were for Marx and some just liked his ideals. Marx was not super famous during his life, and he became a lot more famous like once communism really started to take a hold of people. And so I'd say it's really a bit of both, depending on the person.
Who puts Marx's ideas into action in the Russian Empire? Lenin. And it's Lenin that's going to be revered as everything but divine. His body's still embalmed in Red Square in Moscow, so that tells you something. People go by and look at Lenin's body. So that's who puts the idea. It's charisma. It's the middle of the First World War. They're desperate people looking for a solution, and they've not been treated well. And so you blame those who are in charge, and that's when revolutions do occur. So Marx's ideas are put into action by someone who sees that they have an opportunity, through those ideals to grab political power. And they hope usher in a different kind of world, which they do. It's just more destructive. Todd?
One, I want to say excellent job presenting this subject. I know you had to do a lot of research and it's very in-depth, so well done. My next kind of question is it's also kind of just a comment as well, but like, how do you think this affected the families during this time? Like you mentioned, like religious groups are referred to as cults. And like here in like our Western world, and we're raised around religion, that there's a church almost on every corner, and then you live in a country like that where it's seen as a cult and, like you're saying, degraded and brought down. I'm curious what it was like to live, or if you saw anything in your research about what it was like for people born during this time and maybe just being like brought up during these early stages of communism.
Right. Well, really, there was a lot of brainwashing involved. Like a lot of the emphasis on the atheism was to indoctrinate children into it. Like they would put up these portraits of Stalin and Lenin in the classroom so that they would see them as like, this is your king, this is your leader. And really, it was to make the religious people's pariahs, social pariahs, because you would be excluded from things, especially related to like government activities or things like that. And so, even without direct religious persecution, there would have been that sort of like ostracization of the people who were religious still.
Our religion instructs our lives, our spiritual lives are the center of what we are. Well, if all that's taken away, are you disoriented? Can you be reoriented by somebody else in a different fashion then? Yes, and the next generation really is where you see it. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, if you've never read The Gulag Peninsula, read it. If you've never heard of him, look him up. He does become a believer precisely because he goes to a prison camp and he's left alone with his thoughts. And he realized man does have a soul. And that's what the Soviet system denied. We are materialistic purely. The soul really doesn't exist. And as crazy as that sounds to us, that is what they preach. And I mean it that way, that's what they preach. Which is why it's in such direct opposition to the Western world. So, Kate?
You mentioned that in the Communist Manifesto he uses a lot of religious language in a sense, which seems really ironic considering it originated out of like hatred for God. Do you think this was like an intentional effort on his part to almost replace these terms with his own verbiage, or is this kind of just I don't like an ironic fact?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, his father was very religious, and he was initially religious, so he knew what Christianity was. He knew what Judaism was, and really, I think a lot of his religious allusions in the Communist Manifesto was to portray it as a social reform, because that's what Jesus came to do. He came to change people, and that's what Marx wanted to do. And he wanted to replace religion with his theories. That's what he wanted to do. And so it makes sense that he would try to make it similar to that, appealing like that as a social reform.
I'm not very familiar with communism in Russia, but I was just wondering, like, is there a reason why Christianity was targeted more than any other religion in like Soviet Russia, or is it like, because I know a lot of the bordering countries are like Muslim or Buddhist, so it's just because like his dad was a convert to Christianity.
I'd say the main reason is because the Russian Orthodox Church ruled the country. To push out the religious power, also pushed out the political power of the church. The Tsars were the kings, and they were the head of the church. And so also Christianity was just the primary religion of Russia, and so that's why it was targeted the most. Like there were still something like 10,000 out of 12,000 mosques were closed down, so it definitely wasn't just Christianity, it was all religion, but since Christianity was the predominant religion, that's why it got targeted the heaviest.
Now, a lot of Jews were driven out in the 1890s by the Tsar. The Fiddler on the Roof, fictional story, tells something along the lines of what actually happened to a lot of people. And a lot of them come to the United States. Some go elsewhere. And so, yeah, it's persecution of all religions as you get to the communist world. But most of the Jews are already gone. No?
Yeah, you mostly focus, on the foundations in Lenin and Marx, but I think it's interesting to look to today. We can still see these, the foundations that were set up back then. Through things like critical theory and the emphasis on identity. I think I kind of draw that back to the Bible too. You can either be slaves to God and to His commands, or you can be slaves to something else that fills in that same spot. But you really can't be free. And people who subscribe to the various critical theory ideologies are slaves to that belief system instead of Christianity, instead of actually being what they would say is free from the chains of religion or something like that.
There was an article in today's Wall Street Journal. If you don't have your student subscription, you need to get it. One of the articles had to do with the attempted elimination of religion in the United States by some people over the last 20 years. And it's just a reality from the left and right, you're hearing this now, that when you do that, you don't free people. It goes back to exactly what you're saying. And it's exactly what they tried here. By taking away the parameters morally, you're just substituting other slavery for yourself. In this case, a totalitarian state. So yeah, it's a good point. And it's as recent as today. Yeah, Kelly?
You mentioned the criticism that Marx and Freud had of religion, calling it an opium or the masses or some sort of illusion that hides people from the realities of life or from the pains of life. And I think I think in some ways there is some credence to what they had to say about that, in the fact that a lot of people and a lot of Christians in America simply use religion in a utilitarian fashion, almost to mask the pains of their life. But I think that's a calling true religion, or if you look at true Christianity and what the Bible actually teaches, calling that an opium is a deep misunderstanding of what's actually taught, because what is taught is a confronting of pain and suffering and a willful acceptance of responsibility and burden. And so as Christians, I guess maybe my question would be, you know, are there elements you think of these criticisms that we can look to as sort of a mirror of this is how they've perceived religion to be in other circumstances, but how can we seek to live rightly so that this is not a fair criticism of us?
Right, yeah, no,